right? All right, so this might not be what you're expecting, but if we say that we're student-centered, that students are at the heart of what we do, that means we open this with our students. So here we go. Let's get it. Isang baksak in Tagalog means one down or one fall. It's meant to symbolize the notion that when one of us rises, we all rise, and when one of us falls, we all fall. Our students that you see behind us represent student leaders in the MANA program. They represent some of my mentees, some of the folks that really symbolize our future. And they're gonna be part of the closing, so get ready, this is just the beginning. So let's give a round of applause for our students that help us open this. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. This is our first ever Filipino-American History Conference at MiraCosta. I was getting emotional in the back because it was Wendy Stewart and Alkeitha Wojcik that introduced me. These are two women that I consider to be one of my biggest mentors on this campus. When we talk about heart, when we talk about advocacy, they're the ones that model that for me. I've never had mentors that are these strong women of color that are not just at the table, but they're running a college. They make me believe that I can step up and do the same one day, and I guarantee you that that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be one of the first Filipino women to run a college, Vice President of Student Services, so trust me on that. I got you. A piece of knowing what it means to be Filipino means honoring our history and legacy. I'm gonna work with this mic. Legacy of resisting centuries of colonization. To be Filipino means to have resilience, to have courage, that we know what it means to have resistance coursing through our veins. When I talk about being Filipino, it means to love, to prioritize your family, to know that the collective is more important than the whole. It's not about you. It's about every single person sitting in the audience. It's about who you call ate, who you call manong, kuya, who you call your mom, your dad, your mentors. My presence in front of you today means that I'm representing centuries of ancestors that have stories that have gone untold. We are left out of history books, but trust me when I say that we have done so much to change the world. And I'm gonna share a sequence of stories that will highlight that for you. My name is Cristine Jane de la Torre Sidela. Not a lot of people know that my first name is not Cristine, it's Cristine Jane. So my family, my closest friends call me Janine. I wear it on my wrist. When I think about the communities that I represent, I come from Metro Manila, Philippines. I come from Gage Park, Southwest Chicago, San Francisco, California, Oceanside, California. I rep these communities proudly, and I go into these communities with the mindset that I'm gonna walk out knowing that I've made a change and an impact, but not just through me, through other people, through every single person that I meet along the way. To be honest, in the days leading up to today, I felt splashes of imposter syndrome. And I'm looking right at one of my mentors, Adrian Askernies. He always coaches me and tells me, like, you got this, stop tripping, it's all in your head. But to be honest, the questions of, am I Filipino enough to be the keynote for this? What does that mean? Am I worthy to be standing in front of them, repping our culture, when I can't even speak Tagalog anymore, and it was my first language? And so I realized, you know, I represent Filipino Americans that maybe have never felt enough for their culture. Am I Filipino enough to be wearing this handmade barong Tagalog, handmade in the Philippines, imported? Am I Filipino enough? And I'm letting that drive me today, because I am. And I'm far from the usual, but that's where I draw my strength from. When you're Filipino-American and you're growing up in this community, you have two different identities competing against one another. It's that culture clash. It's always these messages of, am I enough? Am I American enough to be here? And am I also Filipino enough to rep for my community? Last night I had a full-blown, like, I was struggling. I'm like, look, if I just don't show up, no one's gonna notice, right? Like, I can tag one of you guys in, you got me? And one of my mentors, JP, he actually texted me, and I would like to actually read you that text message because it gave me a second wind. He wrote, "Cristine, heroes, resilience, and bravery flow through you, and you have a chance to remind our folks that they too have this flowing through their veins. Remember the pride and history that runs through your veins and speak to that. You got this." And I do. Thank you. I don't know about you, but growing up, the Philippines was not mentioned in any of my history books. I remember feeling excited if they even name dropped one sentence about Filipino culture. The word that comes to mind is invisibility, and it was painful. I didn't understand why I didn't see myself represented in curriculum, classes. I went through all of school not having a Filipino professor until I was in my master's program. So the unity clap that you saw to start this off, it actually originated from the United Farm Workers movement, many of which folks associate that with Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, who were legendary figures in the labor movement. But a story that's often untold is that it was actually a Filipino farm worker, Larry Itliong. He led the grape strike that eventually inspired others to walk off the fence. It was Filipino-Americans that were the first to walk off, to protest, to do this for dignity, for better rights, better working conditions. Isang bagsak, one fall. The phrase in the title of the keynote is "No History, No Self." It's meant to pay humble reverence to Dr. Jose Rizal, who is the national hero of the Philippines. The quote translates to, "Those who fail to look back to where they came from will never get to their destination." He was brilliant. He was a writer. He protested against Spanish colonial rule of the Philippines, and not a lot of people know his story. That it was actually through his novels that indirectly sparked the Philippine Revolution. He was executed for rebelling, but what he did was he started a movement. And when we talk about movements, I want to bring it back to student leaders. When you saw our community of students come up here, it reminded me of San Francisco State University and the strike that was led by Filipino-American students in solidarity with the Black Student Union, in solidarity with the Native American Student Union, La Raza. We had the student community and these orgs, they led the longest protest in college history, and they protested because they were tired of not seeing themselves in curriculum. They were tired of not having classes that mentioned their history. And because of that year-long strike, we now have ethnic studies departments across the nation, and it started with student leaders. So trust me when I say I'm always trying to gas you all up and empower you, because I know what can happen from these movements, that this is just the beginning for each of you, and I'm proud. Presently, Filipino Americans were the second largest Asian American population in the US, but we're some of the most underrepresented. One of the stories that I want to tell you today is I remember walking through the streets of downtown San Francisco, and the woman in front of me collapsed. She was having a seizure, and there's chaos around me. Someone to my left is calling 911, people on the right are panicking, and the guy that's calling 911 looks at me and he's like, on the phone with 911, he's like, "Oh, thank God, we have a nurse here. We'll be okay. We'll be okay." And I sit there like, I'm sorry, we're all out of nursing abilities today. Can I interest you in some college counseling? They didn't expect me to not be able to step up and to just magically pull out the ability to save lives. But what I will say is that something I struggled with even in choosing career paths is, what type of message am I sending if I deliberately go against the grain? That if it's always been tradition to be a nurse, to join the Navy, to be in the military, what does it mean for me to step forward and say that I want to be a counselor, I want to be an educator, I want to work in higher ed? And along with that, it's how am I supposed to retain this cultural identity when every single day of school means learning history that's not my own, of learning history that leaves my identity and the contribution of my community out? So what I will say to you is that when you think about the message, don't ever forget where you came from, that's something my mom always tells me. When we immigrated to the US, we had nothing. Both of my families come from poverty. My mom with 9 siblings from Mindoro, my dad, 6 siblings from Cavite, both of them barely making ends meet even when we did immigrate here. And she would always tell me, Don't ever forget your culture. Don't forget where you came from. Rise above, but don't forget to look back. And when I think about where I stand in front of you today, if it wasn't for their sacrifice, if it wasn't for their choice to leave an entire country behind and come to the US, I wouldn't be standing here. But when we talk about the culture clash, it's knowing that you're getting conflicting messages of don't forget your culture, but in order to survive, you have to adapt. That in order to survive in America, you have to code switch. You have to have your values blend. If you want to survive, you have to assimilate. You have to acculturate. And a lot of that means sacrificing some of your culture and who you are. So the message I'm trying to send to you today is that I want you to be proud of our culture, proud of the fact that we always prioritize the collective over the individual, that we come from centuries of resistance. But if you were to close your eyes and picture a Filipino professional, what's the first thing you think of? I bet it's someone that's working in healthcare. I bet it's someone that is proudly serving the military, which is great. But what about Filipino professors, Filipino professionals, researchers, deans, vice presidents, chancellors? Why is that harder to imagine? It's because we don't see that every day. We don't. Ironically, when I think about being an undergrad student, I was a nursing student, which is hilarious because for those of you that know me well, I cry when I get paper cuts. I avoid flu shots because I'm scared of needles. So I feel like I would contribute to fatalities rather than save lives if I were to ever join the nursing profession. But what I love about my family is when I told them I wanted to get a degree in psychology, they were like, "What's that? Can you make money doing that?" And I said, "Nope." Got a couple blank stares, and I said, I don't know, but I'm in love with it. And I need you to support me, because I guarantee that your sacrifice coming to this country will be worth it someday. And I stand here at 26, head of household in my family, the only person that has a job in my family right now, as the provider. And I'm proud of that. That is my biggest accomplishment. It's not the master's degree. It's not being able to say that I'm a Keynote. It's being able to say that I provide for my family. And that's my biggest value, that reciprocity, that care. It's a cycle. When I think about careers and folks ask me what I do and kind of what inspired me to move forward, I think the best story that depicts that is something that happened recently. There is a national conference called NCORE. It stands for National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. And MiraCosta, through Student Equity, sends teams of people every year. But the first time I ever went to NCORE, I went to a workshop titled Women of Color in Executive Leadership. So I'm like, oh, that's me. That's what I want to do. And I walk in the room and I look around and it's that sinking feeling and it's pain, because not a single facilitator or panelist was Filipino. And I look around the room and there's probably 2 other Filipinos in the room and they're looking at me with wide eyes, and I nod, like, I see it. I see what you see. I see that we're not here, that we're not represented. And when I think about that moment, I channeled the anger, I channeled the sadness, and the message that you don't belong here. Women in executive leadership, you don't belong here because you're not here. And I said, you got me messed up because I'm not there yet. So I went home, I did my research, and I saw the opportunity to apply to be an advisory member of the board, to work and run the same org that I didn't see myself in. So I submitted that application. It meant competing nationwide against other higher education professionals. And I got my acceptance letter this past December. Your girl got chosen. They picked me. Out of everyone, they picked me. One of the only California representatives of student affairs in the US. They picked me. I'm serving a 3-year term now for the exact same org that I did not see myself in. All of that to say that when you don't see yourself at the table, you have a choice to make in that moment. Remember that you have resistance and courage surging through your blood. Make room for yourself at the table. Fight for it, for the community. It's my hope for you that you don't just accept it and walk away, that if you are the only Filipino or Filipina in the room in that career, own it and rep it proudly. Because trust me when I say that you never know who's watching, you never know who's being inspired by your story, and who's gonna step forward because you had the courage to. My career trajectory is one of the only Filipina leaders in higher ed. This is my form of resistance. This is for shattering stereotypes and breaking barriers. This is for visibility for our community, for the entire front row that I call my mentees, for fighting for a platform. That just because we don't see ourselves represented in these spaces doesn't mean we can settle for that. I got this, I'm almost at the end. You got it. Wendy, one of my mentors, she looked at me, she's like, girl, don't cry. You gotta talk, don't cry. And I'm like, Wendy, you're asking too much of me. We can't just keep saying, well, that's just the way it is. We don't really hear about Filipinos, that's just the way it is. That's not the way it has to be. Isang bagsak, one fall. Your presence here today marks history, the first time we've ever had a Filipino-American conference. You've heard a little bit about the history, about the legacy, you've heard about representation, and you've heard a little bit about my humble history. But this is just one lens and one perspective. What I'm gonna have is I'm gonna have my student leaders join me again, and they're gonna help me lead the closing. So if you can rise and come join your ate on stage, let's get it. The people that you see joining me on stage, many of whom being Filipino-American, this is a call to action. I'm gonna have a moment where we're just gonna post up in silence for a little bit. I want you to see them. Y'all making me so emotional. I can't. I just had one job. Keep it together for the closing. They inspire me to aim higher, to accomplish more, because I'm doing it for more than just myself. I'm doing it for them, for my parents, my older brother James, my mentors, and the community. The call to action is to retain and honor what makes you proud. What are you proud of? Just know that I want you to pursue your passion, that the bar does not exist. You are the bar, so set it high. You're worthy. You're enough. And I need you to stand up here with me. It's not about me, it's about each of you. It's about each of them. Andre, Sosa, Kit Kat. These are your future sociologists. Take a look. Kanoa. That one's mine. Marine biologist. Luna. Heidi. Artists. Al. Welding. Michael. Physician assistant. Catherine. Wildlife biologist. Kevin. Automotive tech. Miguel. ER nurse. Marissa. Cultural anthropology. Lance. Kinesiology. Tristan. Linda. Psychology. Chemo. Kinesiology. Do you see them? I need you to see them because this is for them and this is for you. So we're gonna end this the same way that we started it. And this time I need your help. I need you to rep for the Filipino community. Can you all do the unity clap with us one time for the culture? Can you do the Isang Bagsak? I'm gonna walk you through it. I'm gonna walk you through it. So the unity clap, it starts off slow like a heartbeat. It's meant to mirror the beat of your heart. So you clap slowly. Slowly, slowly. And it picks up speed. As more hands come together, it symbolizes resistance, unity, solidarity. When you hear the word isang, I want you to say bagsak, and we're gonna end it with one solid clap. You ready? You ready? You ready? What's up? Y'all can clap louder. I'm embarrassed. Isang! Bagsak! Thank you.